Well, hello. Thank you for joining us. Today, I'm joined by my good friend, Mr. Milton McDonald, who many of you will know. Those of you that don't know him will know his material. He's been the guitarist. I don't think he likes to think how long he's been with Take That, Gary Barlow, but also more recently with Jeff Lynne's ELO. So, Milton, thank you very much for joining us. First of all,
it's my pleasure.
It's good to see you. We were just chatting just before we went live about some of the Take That live shows that we once historically crossed paths on, and that's been a huge part of your career, and we'll touch on that as we talk. But I want to go right back to the beginning, and I want to talk to you about your musical roots first, and kind of how you got started and progressed into this world of session musicianship, and we'll talk about the studio and the live aspect of it. But take us right back to the beginning, and tell us what that looked like for Mr. Milton McDonald.
How far do you want to go back? My piano lessons at 6. You want to go back?
What was the?
Oh yeah, I had piano lessons for a couple of years, 6 and 7. My family are all. Well, my dad wasn't musical, but the rest, my mum and my siblings, are all musical. Sort of naturally, really. So my mum got me piano lessons. I hated it. I mean, I hated to practice. I can remember sitting at the upright in the house, like kicking the panels, above the pedals. Hated it. So I did a couple of years of that. It wasn't the instrument for me. Yeah. I did a few more actually when I was probably 11, 12, and it still was the same. It doesn't speak to me. Ironically, I use a keyboard to record a lot, so I can find my way around it, but it's not. I don't see the shapes. I just have to fiddle about till I find them. But I had what did I have? So I had, there was a guitar in our house, so I started with that about 11. We had a music teacher at school who didn't play the guitar, but he just bought a book and said, "I'm going to do guitar lessons. I'll tell you what it says, and you can do it." So 3 or 4 of us did that with my teacher, Bill Plaxton. He's no longer with us, and it was brilliant. I just loved it. I mean, it was, I was an avid Top of the Pops watcher, and really? Fan of kind of, this is like the early 70s, really, 73, 74. And it was like the Sweet and Slade and all that on telly, and I just took to guitar, really liked it. I found it relatively easy, and it's not, no, that's not fair. It didn't seem like hard work in the way that piano did. It just, and I still say, to anyone who, I sometimes run into people who say, "Oh, I used to play guitar, I wish I'd play guitar," and I still say, it really doesn't matter what age you are. Every kind of hour, or every half hour you spend playing is kind of worth it if you can get over the hump of the painful fingers and just making your fingers kind of do what your head's telling them to do. But past that, it's just a joy. And I still, considering it's been my work, and I've that does affect how I listen, has affected how I listen to music and my enjoyment of music in some respects. But I still get pleasure from playing because it's sort of tactile, and and you can emote, and I think it's always a good thing to do, and I've sort of discovered that I spent quite a lot of time. I spent a bit of time thinking I was pretty good, when through the kind of 90s, where I was really working a lot, and you can sort of start to believe the hype, and it's I really realize as I get older that how very lucky I've been. I can play the guitar. It's something I love to do, so I've spent a lot of hours doing it, so there's a degree of skill, and I've got some musical kind of ability, sort of innate ability. But on another day it could have been any number of other players that I see that are brilliant. So so in a way, this is what it's kind of a version. I'm living a kind of version of a dream I had when I was that age, 10, 11. And I know some people I was talking about this with Mike Stevens this morning, and I know some people kind of who get very successful. I'm just kind of mid-level success. I'm not, you know. I'm not,
I don't know.
Well, it depends how you calibrate it, but you know, I'm, you know,
I know exactly what you
I'm
mean.
on the front of guitar magazines. I'm not like famous or whatever. So, but we were saying that some people who get very successful imagine that they kind of deserved it because they worked really hard and they earned it, and that's their
They're right.
they're right, and they're just deserts. And you know, you can just see. I've seen brilliant players who, you know, and you can't even say, yeah, it's because he's a difficult guy. Or sometimes it is, but it can just didn't work out right. And I think it's important for me to just recognise how fortunate I've been. You know, really.
So when did it become apparent to you that you could make a living out of this? It could become a career.
Any day now.
I knew you were going to say that.
It's I don't know. It's now it seems like a massive kind of sort of hubris, really. You know, I played in sort of local bands. I grew up in Scarborough, and then I moved in a roundabout way to Milton Keynes, and I was at college in Milton Keynes, sort of 17 to 19 years old. And I was in a band there, like a punk band. I had really long hair, and people used to think I was a girl because the rest of the band were all like spiking, wearing their nan's, you know, jumpers and that. But, and I think I was, you know, kind of like a big fish in a small pond. Not a big fish, but you know, I was as good as anyone around there.
Yeah.
And then I was in another band that we did a lot of recordings and, you know, did demos and took to the record companies. I think people used to do that still in those days. Like, you know, we used to drive up to London, get meetings and meet people, and they'd say, yeah, you know, go away and do some more on like a TIAC 4-track at you know, my friend's flat. And we did that for a while, and it kind of just ran its course, really. And then I decided I would start doing auditions in London in Melody Maker, which is what everyone used to do, you know. Andy Taylor, At Duran, and all those people. That's gigs, you know. So I answered an ad. I went down to audition and got that one. It was sort of the first one I did. And then I started playing in that band, and it was a new band that was formed from a nucleus of an old band that were called Blue Zoo, who'd had some success and were managed by Simon Napier Bell and Jazz Summers. So I was in that band for a couple of years, and we had the kind of that there wasn't any money in it, but we had the kind of, there was a bit of a business kind of, what you'd call it, a network around it.
Infrastructure was behind
exactly, it. Yeah. So I did that for a couple of years. We did proper recordings in proper studios, and I think at each stage, I was waiting to be found out. You know, I was waiting for people to go, actually, you're not really good in it. And it sort of didn't happen. And so as I said, I kind of, so I was in that band a couple of years. We finished with that. Then I answered another audition thing and got an actual paying gig that was like 100 quid a week, and I was made up. Like, we bought me and my then girlfriend, we bought like a fridge freezer the first week, and we've been living on nothing. I was signing on all this time, which was, you know, something I don't think is an option now. And you know, whatever people think about kind of, you know, scrounging off the welfare set, but I mean, that was enabled me to have an apprenticeship playing music with people.
Absolutely.
When you know, there was no money to be made, but ultimately I've become a tax-paying, you know, musician. So that band kind of ran its course, really, and then I did this other audition and did a few auditions and got some of them, and then I was starting to make money, and it was just, I'd been used to living on very little money. I mean, you know, I don't remember. My then girlfriend had a housing association flat, so it was ridiculously cheap in Shepherd's Bush. It was like a 2-bed flat of £27 a week.
Wow.
Again, that's the only way I could have afforded to live in London. So, and it just great. And I've never been like super ambitious. I'm not a kind of scrabble my way to the top sort of person, really. You know, as my wife will tell you, I'm quite lackadaisical, really. But I was definitely more ambitious then, and I just went for lots of things. I auditioned for, you know, I mean, the things I didn't get. I auditioned for the Pretenders, didn't get that. I auditioned for Brian May when he was doing a solo thing, didn't get that. There was loads of good Gaylan Dorsey's band, I didn't get that. You know, so it's like there were a lot more gigs going. I think I auditioned for Jason Donovan, didn't get that one.
Perhaps a blessing in disguise.
You never know. But you know, so there were more things to do, and the stories at that time. You know, I used to rehearse down at a Nomis, which is no longer there, but it was like a rehearsal studio in Shepherd's Bush behind Olympia. And they had all around the walls in the corridors, they had pictures of all the artists that rehearsed there. And it was a gallery of success. You know, it was like, but of the time. So it was like Landau Duran, Marilyn, you know, Cutting Crew. I can't remember. It's just like people with hair, you know, big hair and stuff. And so there was a sense that you were kind of part of something that could happen, you know, that might happen. And then this is a long story because I'm really old, so then I joined a kind of rock band and that were managed by the guy who managed Yes, the group, and we did some shows, and then nothing particular was happening. It was a sort of infrastructure kind of trying to make something happen, but it wasn't particularly happening. And then Brian Lane, the manager of Yes, said John Anderson, the singer out of Yes, is putting a new album together with a kind of with the original members or a different set of members of Yes, but he wants to kind of keep control of it initially. So he wants some guitar player, a keyboard player, sort of programmer, and a drum programmer to work with, so he can kind of put together the thing before he then opens it up to the rest of the band, which is very John Anderson actually. So we did that, and I went round his house. He played me two. I remember because he was building an album from some stuff that Steve Howe, the guitar player, had recorded, and some stuff of John's. And I remember, this is fairly typical of John, I remember him playing me two cassettes of one of each things in different keys and different times at the same time. Like, this is what I want to do. And so and so all of a sudden, you know, that I did an album in France, which was a kind of mad, you know, John lying in a hammock trying to describe what he wanted, you know, what he wanted me to play. So that was quite an interesting time, but sort of brilliant. And then a year later, or maybe 6 months later, they just sort of called out of the blue and said, look, they're doing a world tour and John wants you to do it.
Wow.
How much money would you want for that? You know, and I went from earning, you know, I don't know, like $7,000 a year, to earning, I don't know, like 50 grand in a year or something. It was an absolute eye opener. I then thought that would be me touring America, you know, forever onwards. And I didn't go back for 10 years or something, but I did a year with them on at quite a high level kind of arena American tour, which was sort of fascinating, and they were kind of, you know, in some respects, Yes are one of the archetypal kind of caricature. I don't know, musically certainly, but also just, you know, they are that kind of old, you know, everything that punk was against. That's kind of what they were. So it was really intriguing, and working with John, you know, it's funny because a couple of my bandmates from Take That and ELO have been working with John recently. Lee Pomeroy, the bass player, has been playing with ARW, which is Anderson, Rabin and Wakeman. And John hasn't changed at all by all accounts. You know, he's sort of brilliantly awful. He's so like, he's a kind of dictator, and he just wants what he wants. Yeah. But he's funny with it, and also
he doesn't take it too seriously. But it's really.
Well, he sort of does take it seriously, but also he's got he's completely sort of self-taught, no theory of music, but it's just a natural raw musicality that is quite breathtaking. Actually, he's just got it. You know, he's just got it, and he's just someone who could do it, and he's properly ambitious and still is. You know, he'll be don't know what he is, late 60s, early 70s maybe now, but you know, he's a different kettle of fish from me. You know, I've just kind of bumbled along really, trying to be a good guy, you know.
So you'd figured out that you could make a living at this, thanks to those opportunities that you've just kind of talked to us about. When people think of session musicians, I guess initially they think of studio sessions, which you and I both know have become less available, and there are less opportunities to do that now. But equally, there's the live stuff, and actually live music. Certainly in the last 15 years, as it perhaps hit a low maybe 15 years ago, it began to increase again. So stats would indicate that. You've seen both of those kind of change from, I mean, you talked about the 70s and kind of gigging then through to some of the arena tours that you're part of now, which are productions on a scale that back then you couldn't possibly have imagined would ever exist. I guess it was like something out of the future, literally, wasn't it? But centuries ahead rather than in your lifetime, I guess. Talk us through those transitions, both in respect of the demands of a session musician in the studio and as a live session musician as well. Start with the studio. How have the demands on session players in the studio changed in your career?
I started doing bits and bobs of sessions, I suppose, towards the end of the 80s, and again, as I said before, I was always just waiting to be found out, because as far as I knew, session musicians read music. I don't, I sort of can, but not to any useful level, So, session musicians were basically proper trained musicians. They weren't someone who had, grade 1 in guitar, which is what I've got. But I sort of fell into it, and I had the kind of, what's the word? Not self-belief, but the sort of the kind of the sound of self-belief of youth, or the idiocy of youth. You just think, okay, they seem to think I could do this, so I'll give it a go. And I just learned how to do it bit by bit. When I started doing sessions, everything was very machine-led. The drums were pretty much all programmed on the stuff I did, so everything was super in time. Everything was quantized. So I suppose, and no one wanted kind of guitar solos or anything like that. It was all kind of just clean rhythm guitar, really. And so I learned, or attempted to be super precise. People would be dropping in like a 16th note, like you do a part and they drop in that 16th note and that 16th note. So I think I started to learn about accuracy, because that never occurred to me. I grew up listening to records, not thinking about how in time they were or how locked in the musicians were. It didn't, but you kind of learn it anyway, because you're listening to great musicians and they are locked in their own way, So, and then it just, I don't know, it just sort of got busier. I used to work with a band called Dry as a Bone, who were basically like a studio-based kind of funk thing, and I did a lot of stuff for them, and I think my name used to be on the back of their records, and they were really funky. So I think things came through that, and the height of it was through working with Gary Barlow, actually, on his solo stuff back in the 90s. They wanted a production team called Absolute wanted to redo one of his songs that I played on, and they wanted the guitar solo as acoustic guitar solo, and they wanted that particularly. So they called me. This is probably, I don't know, about 97 or something. They called me and said, we don't really use session. I didn't know who they were either. But they just called at home and said, we got your number from Gary. We're reproducing one of his songs. We haven't really used any session musicians. So do you bring guitars? Should we hire guitars? What do you want? And I said, I can bring some guitars. So I went and did that. They had their own studio on one of the EOTs in the Thames. I don't know if it's Eel Pie or one of those anyway. And I went and played on this thing. And while I was there was all these kind of references to the Spice Girls knocking about, because they'd done half of that album, but I didn't know because I wasn't particularly a fan, and I didn't, just wasn't aware. So, and then the session went well because I was basically replaying something I'd already done, so it's kind of the easy way in. And then they said, look, we're doing quite a lot of productions. It'd be great for you to come and do some more. So I did quite a lot of Spice Girls stuff, and just all the stuff at the time, kind of Westlife and Boyzone, and all the pop groups at that time, All Saints, all that. And then they kind of passed me around. They were managed by Native Management, which was the producers sort of wing of 19. So they kind of passed me around, so the other producers, they were all making hit records. It was this kind of industry, they were making a lot of the hits. So it was just a really rich scene, and I would go in and stick all my guitars in a cab. I was still living in London then, and play on something, knowing that in 6 weeks or like 2 months it would be in the top 10 or top 5 or whatever. Yeah. And you used to and so I could charge good money for it because everyone was making money and they were happy to pay, and I remember doing 3 or 4 songs in a day at like 500 quid a track, and but it took like 4 hours or something because they just wanted a bit on this one. So they were the sort of the good times. And then I can remember watching I didn't watch, it was Pop Idol, and I didn't actually watch it, but I remember it being on in the house, and I came in and Will Young was on actually, and I hadn't seen any of the build up. I just saw him singing on it, and I remember sort of saying he's actually really good, like, and he's different. He wasn't like a kind of kind of pop star
clone of everything else that was about.
And then whatever it was, a month or 2 later, I was in Olympic, like playing on his record. But I remember going down to Olympic, and there was him, Gareth Gates, 2 more guys, I forget their names now, but or maybe a girl and a guy, but the 3 or 4 finalists anyway. What was his name? The other guy. He did a very interesting version of "Hit Me Baby One More Time." Can't remember anyway. But anyway, they were all in Olympic, where I'd done loads of work, in Barnes, and they were all hanging about, all putting a vocal on that song Evergreen, which was going to be the third, because they didn't know who'd won yet.
Yeah, they released it together, didn't they? Yeah.
And I remember, and beyond, and from there, I remember that all these producers that I was working with all seemed to be vying to do the Pop Idol or whatever the shows were, the TV talent shows, and it was all like funneled. So all these guys that had been doing all these records were all trying to do that one record, and it felt, in hindsight, I don't know if I felt it at the time, but it was kind of a bit the writing on the wall, because it was all distilling down to a very small pool of people who were doing stuff.
Becoming very formulaic, wasn't it?
Formula, and as I say, it was getting, there was less. It seemed like the budgets were shrinking. It all kind of ties in, with streaming and all that stuff, But budgets were shrinking, and then, as I say, people discovered if you could play a bit of guitar, you can stick guitar in it. It's going to sound fine. It's going to, you can make it in time, and so. So my work became more about live work again, and
just before we move on to the live stuff, and you won't like talking about this because your humility is quite remarkable, but there must have been something about you to have got the gig after gig after gig on the scale that you were getting in terms of the commercial. Absolutely at the top of the game, and I know you will downplay it, but you absolutely were. You must have had something that set you apart from everybody else. It must have been true. And that was not necessarily something that would be musical. It perhaps might be an aspect of character. One thing that I know from my experience is that to have any longevity in this industry, there has to be that humility that we just mentioned, but also you've got to be one of those people that people want to spend time with, because studios can become really stressful environments, can't they?
They can, but in the studio, to be honest, brevity is all important. So what they want is, so I'd say it's a combination of things. Obviously, some musical ability, but but I'm not the best guitar player on the block. You know, I'm technically, I'm definitely not. And you know, I think what my you know what I have, my set of sort of skills or whatever are, I'm pretty good on the guitar because I've been playing it a long time. I've got a good ear for music, not so much. I know people who can, you know, you play a chord that's like a cluster chord and they can pick out every note really. I'm not that, you know, to a degree, but it's, you know, I know people who really can really hear everything.
That's their thing.
But what I think I've got a good ear for is kind of the flavour of something. So what's important in the style, you know. So when I was doing sessions, you know, I'd do like, you know, they'd want something that was really kind of Latin sounding or whatever, sort of jazz or sort of, you know, country or whatever. And I'm not a specialist in any of those sort of genres at all. But I can play in a way that feels right for that sort of style. And so you know, so I can't sit in a room with proper jazz. I do have to sit in a room with proper jazzers, and it's hilarious because you know, I play chords that sometimes only have 2 notes in them because I just can't. But I think for what I do, it's, you know, not to belittle pop music, but pop music is generally fairly straightforward and simple. You know, it's trying to appeal to people that want a tune they can catch on to and all that. So it is formulaic, and so I've got enough ability to play it. And I think another thing is that I really I'm able to extract some joy and sort of value from whatever piece of music that I'm asked to play. And that might sound something, I don't know, but you know, like I've played with some artists, you know, you can read my CV and everyone would have their own opinions on who's important, who isn't. But you could read through some and maybe think, you know, why was he wasting his time playing with that person? But the truth is, pop music isn't. There's, you know, there's no kind of not intellectual. There's no kind of academic measure of what's good and what isn't. You can think what's good. You know, we all do. You know, think what's good. You can say something's more difficult, something's more, you know, nuanced to it. But basically, people like what they like, and I won't name anyone. But if you like this artist, and someone else thinks it's not, but it doesn't have very much musical, you know, content or whatever. But when you're playing in a kind of musical setting, if someone's going to sing a melody, you know, you need to play that. You need to make that song work, and I think that's what I've got more than anything. So I've played all kinds of music, and I've tried to treat it all the same. Not even try it. I think that's what I do. You know, you just treat it with the same amount of respect, and I think artists get that, even if sometimes they might not be aware, because why wouldn't you treat them with respect? You know, they might not realise, but that not everyone thinks they're brilliant. But you know, it's again, you know, I said at the start, I'm aware of how lucky I've been, and part of realizing that is accepting that, you know, music isn't you know, I work with some people who are very high sort of lofty ideals about music, and I understand. I have some of them too. You know, I can hear the things that are pure music, you know, Pat Metheny or something. You know, it's just pure music, pure kind of joy. But I think that can get in the way of really good musicians playing some kinds of music, because inside they're dying, because they're going, this is not, I should be playing better music than this, and I don't have that particular problem. So I think it's that I'm a nice guy. I don't sort of throw big strops and, you know, stick me oar in, and I can be told what to play. As I've got older, I've been very fortunate, because I've worked with the same set of musicians quite a lot. Mike Stevens for God knows, you know, 25 years or something. And we had a nucleus then, and we have a nucleus now. And the guys that I do take that and ELO with, I've worked with for, you know, you know, a decade more, 10, 15 years. So I'm comfortable with my role in that. I'm not the MD, but if I've got any ideas, I'll stick them in. But I don't want the responsibility. It's, Mike always has that responsibility of having to get the thing done, and what his skill is putting together groups of musicians that work really well together, and so the thing just gets done without you even noticing. He doesn't have to order people about, tell them what to do. But so yeah, so
that kind of brings us on talking about Mike and moving the transition from those studio sessions with the Spice Girls era, if you like, into the live thing. As those sessions began to dry up and opportunities became less frequent, live work became a far more important revenue stream, really, because to survive as a working musician, there's got to be a revenue stream. The studio stuff wasn't there as much. Live became important. Kind of talk us through that transition and how that's been.
I mean, they were always running side by side, really. So it wasn't really one or the other. And I never was such a prolific studio musician that I could afford to just do that. I know, some players, that's their, bread and butter. They do 4 sessions a day. I don't know if it's the same now, but they would do an orchestral session. They do a TV jingle. They do some radio stuff. They do a lot, and that I was never that. I was just coming in, playing on people's pop records. So I wasn't a studio musician in the traditional sense, really. But so they were always running in tandem, but just gradually one kind of, one became clearly more prevalent than the other. But I think really from the time we did I met Mike, I think around probably 90 or 91, and we did a charity show thing, which involved just learning a load of songs for a load of different artists for not very much money, and then doing a show. And I met Mike doing that, and we got on well. And he got me to do a couple of things in his studio, I think, at the time. And then we did some shows with a singer called Grace Kennedy, who was she was like a big star, really, when I was like in the late 70s, I suppose. She had her own TV show. She was a kind of like middle of the road singer, really, I guess. And we did some shows. He put a band together for some shows in Europe for her. We did like Monte Carlo and some different places. And then maybe 6 months or so after that, or a year after that, I don't remember, maybe it's the same sort of time, he got a call via David Grant, who's was a pop star, as a successful, well, he kind of is on TV, does a bit of everything now. He's TV, he's a vocal coach and stuff, he and his wife, and that were looking to put a band together. They were looking for musicians, and they had an MD in place, but they needed some more people, and so they contacted Mike. Mike contacted me, and that was that, really. And we did one kind of week-long tour. I mean, we rehearsed with them. It's funny because I didn't particularly follow pop music at the time, so I knew who they were, but I didn't know any of their songs or anything, because I'm like 33 and they're like 19 or something. I think Robbie was 17 maybe when we started. But we went down to this place in the middle of nowhere in Wales and started learning their songs for a live show. And it was when the song called Pray was out, and we hadn't met them or anything. It had been put together as a kind of thing for them. And they were up in London doing Top of the Pops, doing Pray, which was like #1. And then they came down to this place in Wales, which was like a rehearsal stuff place, but it was really quite basic. It was like a barn and a sort of bed and breakfast, really, in the middle of nowhere. And we sort of got to know them, hung out and played like table tennis and all that, and sat around campfires and told stories, but really in isolation. So it was lovely because we kind of got to know them, and they were really, they were and are really sweet guys. And then we rehearsed, and then we had to go up. I think it was up to the GMEX in Manchester to do the first show of Scotland. I can't remember, and then we sort of arrived, and then realised what it was absolute, madness. These like kids everywhere, trying to get into hotels, trying to you know, getting onto their, but, and it was just bizarre because we got to know them in this sort of, you know, rarefied atmosphere, and actually got to know them a little bit before the sort of the madness. And then from then it just kind of went crazy, you know. We did a short tour, then we did another one later that year, and then we did it. It's funny because it was only, I think only 3 years we did, from sort of 93 to 96 was the last bit we did. And I was still, as I say, I was doing sessions during this as well. But it was quite a sort of eye opener really, because I hadn't worked with artists on that level, and we were doing arenas, and it just kind of carried on really. And then it was over, you know. Then it's sort of Gary decided to stop, and that was that. But then I went on to do some of his solo stuff, and that group of musicians, so me and Mike and Paul Turner, particularly, we were sort of in demand because we'd been doing all that stuff. And I mean, I remember one day we did, and it seems mad now, I can't remember if it was 3 or 4 different things in one day. We did like a breakfast TV with someone, Jerry Halliwell. We were rehearsing during the day with Bewitched. We did something with Martine McCutcheon, and we did a daytime show, TV show with Gary Barlow, and we literally were doing all these like all in one day, like 4 days. So it went from, and then after a while, and we did that for a while. We had maybe 2 or 3 years of like being like people going, "Can we get those guys?"
You know, that's by anybody's standards. It's intense work. It's, you know, there's an intensity about that. How do you manage that? Because you know that's, I say, by any work, any industry, that's full on. How do you make sure that you stay at the top of your physical and mental game for that sort of pressure and intensity?
I don't know about my physical my physical game. I don't know if that ever was, but I mean, I actually thinking about it, I've not been asked that before in that way, and I think probably it was the fact that we were a unit. You know, we all worked together with these different artists. Some people kind of came and went according to what was required for each artist, but essentially me, Mike, and Paul Turner particularly, you know, we did all that stuff all together from just before Take That, when we did the Grace stuff, and then and that went on for probably 6, 7, 8 years. And actually, we all went through our personal, you know, sort of trials and tribulations and relationships, breakups and things, different times. But we were close, and we were sort of there for each other, and it was a really happy working relationship. You know, we never argued. You know, there really weren't any sort of difficulties with that sort of nucleus. So I think it was that, actually, because it is hard. It is hard to walk into new rooms even every day, you know, to have to impress people. When I think about going back to sessions, when I think about doing recording sessions, because I don't do them now, and the things I do, I kind of can pretty much do at home, you know. The thought of piling all my gear into a car and turning up with people I don't know, and to a song I don't know how easy or hard it's going to be. The thought of that sort of fills me with terror now, that idea, and that's what I used to do, you know, just turn up, hi, yeah, you know, and then they play you a chat, and then in, you know, 20 minutes you're recording the guitars on it, or a load of different guitars probably, and I'm sort of amazed that I was able to do that, really, because it's, you know, that is high pressure.
It's in danger, really, isn't it, of becoming a lost art, true session musicianship, of bringing in external influence into a track. I guess with home studios and production as it is now, the norm is that one person will kind of steer the musical direction in its entirety, whereas back in the era you're talking about, you get a different bass player and a different guitarist, and so your influences, though not intentionally, would actually come from different sources. Do you think
I think the fact of having people all in the room, you know, that's kind of gone. And, you know, you can do remote sessions now. It's really handy. You know, you can do it in your pants, and someone can, you know, but you're making decisions all the time. Even if they say, yeah, give me like something loose, give me something this, you know, but you're tailoring it and kind of curating it before you're sending it to. And one thing I learned when I was doing sessions was, occasionally, they'd ask for a guitar solo, and then so you kind of, I do a guitar solo, and you're sort of trying to serve the song and do not just go off on your own, odyssey or whatever, but you're trying to get a couple of good bits in there, like a couple of bits you're proud of, little lips or whatever.
You look back fondly upon, yeah.
But what I discovered was that I do a take, and the bits that people would like would often be the bits that were between the bits that I liked. That the bit I wasn't thinking about, where I was just trying to get from one good bit to another good bit, from this end to this end.
Yeah.
They would like that transition, and that transition was the bit I hadn't thought about, because I was just trying not to mess it up and get there. So what I learned to do, which again is something that kind of suits my personality, is to give people stuff and go, if you've got what you need there, you can make of it what you will. I'm not saying that this is how it goes. And some people will kind of go, look, I built this solo because it works, and if you take that bit and that bit, you've ruined. That's not your role, unless you're. Do you know what I mean? It's Frank Tontu used to go, yeah, save that for your album. So I think it probably is a lost art, and what would happen was what I was just saying, really, that it's the happy accidents. It's when you're playing and you mess it up, and then you go, oh, yeah, and they go, no, I like that bit. I like that's what did you do? I like that, And sometimes you find something. So those things, and it's the same with photography, with cleaning up all your photographs, or filming. You can get rid of all the mistakes. So and it's it can be from those mistakes that the interesting stuff happens. And that, I'm not saying it's not happening, because people will always be adventurous and idiosyncratic and quirky. So it's not like no one will do it properly anymore. But you just a lot of stuff is really homogenized, because you can, I do it myself. I do guitars, then I tidy them up, and it's like, at what point does it cease becoming a performance?
So fast forward then to take that coming back round, and then we'll move on to the ELO in a minute. But I remember we were reminiscing earlier, and we kind of came back to that circus tour, and I remember just standing there thinking, just before the stadiums were open, and being just kind of stood in the middle of it, just thinking, wow, this is absolutely incredible. This is what it's about. As a young recording engineer at the time, I was, that's what I'd been aspiring to. But you've seen that evolve, and the way that live shows have gone from kind of 200 people in a club in London through to just gigantic productions that they are now. Does that have an effect in terms of musically? Has that changed anything in terms of your world?
Yeah, well, yeah, because what it means is, concerts for most artists were really about the music primarily. They were built from the music up, and some bands were more theatrical, some artists were more theatrical, and some really just stood and played, or some groups didn't really perform, but they would have impressed, like the Pink Floyd or something. They'd have their kind of like light show and everything. And when we did take that the first time round, it was still kind of like the music was still. I'm not saying the music isn't central. Whoops, excuse me. I'm not saying the music isn't central now. It's not a criticism. It's just that
evolved, hasn't it? The show has evolved.
Because more and more stuff is able to be done, because the options are so, and I do believe that, I don't really go to big shows very often, because it feels too distant, and if I'm going to see a musician, that I want to be closer. I don't want to be really watching it on a screen, kind of slightly out of sync with what's been.
Intimacy.
I understand why it's, so I understand why it's, commercially, viable and stuff. But so I do appreciate that if you're going to do a show in a big room, then it is a valid and arguably, you know, much better value to give people a spectacle if they're right at the back of the corner. You know, don't just assume, you know, that that's kind of good enough. You know, I went and saw the Wall, Pink Floyd's Wall at Earl's Court. I sat at the very, very back. I found a ticket the other day and I was going through stuff. It was £10, I think. £7.50, one of the other.
Wow.
But and that was like a big show. But in the end, it's still like, it was impressive, but it was still very far away. You know, it's really, you know, Earl's Court from the back to the front. So Take That were always trying from the very first show. They were trying to get as much in there as possible. They had a show director called Kim Gavin that they started working with very early on, and he had big ideas. And they would go and see shows in Vegas, or go and see, you know, I know, Janet Jackson's show or Michael Jackson's show, whatever was the big kind of Prince, you know, big shows, and what people were doing, like bringing cars on stage, or, you know, flying stuff and all that. So they always had that, and I think it's really. I really applaud them for that, actually, that they've always given their audience like a good value show, like value for the, you know, value for money for the ticket. And it was always, you know, people in the old days in the 90s, it was 14 to 18 whatever year old girls, and then some a bit older, but it really was a young audience, and a few gay men, and a couple of like disgruntled boyfriends and dads, you know, that had been dragged along, you know. But I always felt like, and quite often, you know, you'd get feedback, and it would be people saying, like, I didn't really want to go and see it, but it was really good, you know, because there was a lot. It wasn't just, you know, there was something for everyone there. But as things progressed, you know, when we did it in the 93 to 96, it was all completely live. There was no track. There was no like video syncing or any of that business. There was video cameras, but, you know, there was no.
Yeah, no graphics. Yeah.
So it was so the center of it, as far as we were concerned, was that there was a live band playing everything themselves. You know, we would listen to their records and try and arrange versions that would work with a 5 or 6 or 7 piece we ended up band, you know. But we didn't have string players, we didn't have horn players, you know. So we just figure out how to do it. So it was actually a very organic method of creating music. It felt like the music was being created because we were having to start again and make some music between us that worked for a show. But as time, as time's gone on, you start from the other end. You start with the multi-tracks of a record, you know, and you can listen, you know, I get sent the guitars as a stem, you know, and it's a little bit what I was talking about people working on their own. It removes that. We used to play tracks in the 90s. There wasn't guitar on a lot of them, actually, you know, depending on the period. But so I just used to make parts that were kind of something like the keyboard thing, but it was just listening to it, the whole thing, you know, off a cassette. So it wouldn't always be right, you know, I wouldn't exactly know what was being done, but I would make a part that made sense of 2 or 3 keyboard parts in a guitar. So that was, you know, that's kind of creative. And then the trick now is to make it still feel that you're creating it, when, you know, when the ability is to run, you could run all the strings off the record if you like, or some, you know, extra vocals, or you could run some. So it's hanging on to that of going, no, this is and it's hard because in an industry sense, like everyone in the industry, even if they've only been in it 5 minutes, knows that, you know, knows about stems, you know, knows about that you can separate tracks out, and, you know, knows what can be tuned and what
I think now, even if you're doing GCSE music as a 16-year-old, you have an understanding of that, because it has become
So it's hard to justify, and we've been really lucky. Again, you know, I keep saying how fortunate I've been, but we've been lucky that you Take That don't have to do it the way they do it now. You know, they just don't have to. You know, they could get cheaper people, fewer people, whatever it is they can, you know, but they've always done it this way, and they see the value in it. They appreciate the value in it, and it's they decided to do that, you know.
Touching on tech and gear, and I don't want to turn this into a webinar about equipment. That's a conversation for another day. But I remember on the Circus live record being recording the stems, then the live feeds, and I'd been out with Bon Jovi not long before, where the guitar recording would be like 10 channels, 11 channels of just the guitar part. One thing that struck me going from the Jovi tour to you guys was the simplicity of your rig in comparison to the vast majority. Now that's significant, I think. So talk to us a little bit about your gear, and I don't mean the specifics of the gear, but your philosophy in terms of equipment and gear. And as I say, the simplicity that you operate with is quite remarkable. Talk us through that.
I've always used a fairly simple setup, even when guitar players did get quite technical with racks of gear and running a stereo. I never really got into that. And I've really only had about 3 different sort of setups, like rig setups, through all the years, like 30 whatever years. But I just always, just keeping it simple, really. It's partly a sort of just a bit of a sort of Luddite, you know, and fear of technology. It's taken me a long time to delve into sort of technology at all, really. And I've done it because I've had to, and now I appreciate it. But you know, and you know, most of the stuff I did was in mono. It was really just an amp, a cab, and some pedals, you know. And you know, I still say, you know, if you Gary Moore or Jeff Beck, or, you know, I'm not suggesting I'm in the same realm, but you know, they will sound how they sound, whatever they play through, because it is in the fingers. It's cliche, but it's in your hands. So I never saw the sense in getting too complicated about it. You know, you and really on a sort of financial level for a guitarist, you can. Things haven't really changed. You can buy a Strat for 300 quid. You know, I used one. Excuse me, it's a £300 Chinese Strat, a white one. I used it for a year on ELO and on Take That or Gary Barlow, because I just liked it. It belonged to Mike, and I liked it so much he gave me it. But it's a £300 guitar. So what I'm saying is, you can buy a £300 guitar, you can buy an amp for, you know, probably 500 quid or something, or, you know, all these cheaper secondhand, and you could buy 3 or 4 pedals, maybe not even that. And if you're as good as Jeff Beck, you'll sound like Jeff Beck. You know. So I pity keyboard players who, you know, just have to spend thousands and thousands of pounds and keep doing it. You know, the guitar, you buy a good guitar 30 years ago, you know, it will be worth 10 times what you pay. So there was something about that. I prefer things simple, really. I'm using Kemper now, which is a kind of more modern thing, but I still use it as though it were an amp. I don't use millions of sounds. I basically use one set of sounds, and that's, you know, it's like it's an amp. It's just, but if you're Richie Sambora, you know, the whole thing is set up for you to go, I'm going to use a 3 or 4 amp setup, and I'm going to use different guitars on each song, or, you know, if you can do it, why not? I think I still
even with comparative guitarists in kind of in-house bands, or when you've not necessarily been, you know, Sambora's sound is granted iconic to the Jovi sound, but even in similar sort of scenarios, I've always found your setup to be relatively refreshingly simplistic compared to a lot. That's testing your ability to play, kind of not necessarily reliant on the sound, but as you say, on the hands.
Well, as I say, I think, you know, for whatever, maybe like £1,000 new, you know, or you know, a lot cheaper than that. If you can put together a gig, and you can a setup, and you can use that for the rest of your career. You really can. You know, people get bored. You get bored, and you want new stuff. But essentially, it's that, and also, and from a front of house, you know, sound engineer point of view. Like no one wants you to be.
True.
No one wants, you know, the crew, the stage manager. No one wants a complicated setup with too many links in it that can go wrong. You know, it's sort of part of my personality. I'm trying to be sort of no bother, really, and trying to just be. I've tried to foster the illusion that yeah, if you hire Milton, he'll turn up, he'll know the stuff, his setup's fine, you don't have to think about it, he'll do the right thing. And that's sort of my ideal gig. And as I say, working with Mike and in that kind of that setup is what I think it's what one of the things he does well, is you just get people who just know what they're doing, know what's required. No kind of curveballs. No, if you ask me to do a kind of big old solo, I'll do one for you. But I'm really happy to do it. Might be disappointed if I don't ever get one, but it won't affect the gig. I won't be sulking over it. And I think people want, they want a done deal. We used to do a lot of things for the BBC, like Children Need Rocks and those sort of things. We were the kind of house band for quite a long time.
I mixed one or two of those, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but we did a Diamond Jubilee thing, the Buckingham Palace and all that. And as you will know, the kind of in TV, mostly people are thinking of the visuals, so they're kind of going, and you'll be playing music, won't you, at that point? Without any. But it really is like that. Like they really. Yeah. We did one. I won't say which one it was or which company it was, but we did one that was. It was a disaster. It was a miracle we got through. It was live. It was a load of different artists, outdoors. That's all I'll say. But it so much went wrong. I mean, it was just it was a miracle we got through it.
And I remember failing left, right, and centre. I think I know.
Yeah, we couldn't.
The
monitor, a guy who we'd worked with all through rehearsals, was like down under the stage, so we couldn't see him. Our keyboard player left the stage at one point to find out what on earth was going on, and he just saw our guy who'd been working with us all through rehearsals sitting away from the desk with his head in his hands, and a guy who worked for the artist who's currently on, changing everything. And that's what happened. Each one, the guy jumped on, changed everything, and we were like, so we got through it, a miracle. And we were just looking, and we all went back to, we were invited for a drink by the company that did the show, back to their kind of hotel, and we all just sat and like in virtual silence, just kind of looking at each other, going like, what just happened? And in the background at the bar were guys high-fiving each other. We did it, and it was like, because it went out and it looked okay, but it was a catastrophe waiting to happen like that. If we'd have all gone, I can't work in these conditions, like we could have done, and you'd never do it. But so the music, that's the way I see a lot of it now. It's like I say, it's that thing of new guys will be playing some music, I imagine, at that point. That's how it feels. And I've done this a lot of years, so it's fine. And I don't, it's just that if you're asking what, have I seen the change? That's the change.
Yeah.
It wasn't that for the Pink Floyd. No one was saying, David, can you use less gear? Because, it's really, and actually working with Jeff, has been back to that.
So bring us that brings us nicely onto the ELO call. How did that all come about?
Well, we did Children Need Rocks at Hammersmith Odeon, and Gary Barlow was kind of instrumental in getting the thing together. And he's a massive fan of Jeff's, and he I think he just called him, or called his people, however these things work. I think Jeff had produced a track for Take That because they're big fans of his. So, and then Gary somehow persuaded Jeff, who not considered touring for I think 20 years or something like that, to come and do this thing. And we were the house band for it, and Jeff flew over, and he said he and his wife flew over, and his wife told us on the way over, she said, he was just saying, I don't know why I'm doing this. It's madness. It's going, but I remember the old days. I used to, I'm going to have to tell him every note to play. I don't know if I can even, I don't know if I've got the energy, because he's in his late 60s then, and he hadn't done he'd done one or two special things like with Tom Petty and stuff, but George Harrison. But, she told us, his wife said later, she said at the end of the rehearsal day, we just did Mr. Blue Sky and another song I forget, And when they were like, and they did all that, it was really nice. We were super excited. I mean, we were so excited. We learned all these songs for a lot of different artists for this show. But in the lull, someone would just go, "Should we play Mr. Blue Sky again?" And we just kept playing because it was so good fun, such good fun to play. And my memory of it is that he walked in while we kind of knew, we got the heads up he was coming, so we made sure we were playing it when he came in. So my memory of it, and I'm not, Lee always says this, and I'm not sure if it's actually true, but I like to think it was that I was kind of singing it, because he wasn't there, and just singing it from memory because it was, from my childhood or whatever, my youth. And Lee's memory of it is that I was singing the first verse, and then he kind of took over on the second verse. Jeff Lynne being Jeff Lynne with the bins. But we did that, and his wife said, she told us later, on the way back, he went, "They know it better than me," So we kind of got and basically just over time, his manager had been trying to get him to start gigging, and his wife very much, she really wanted him to get out there and do gigs again, because
part of who he is, isn't it?
Yeah, and so between them, they kind of persuaded him, and he's he's like a sort of, he's very funny, has a very dry wit, but he's kind of, he likes to grumble and stuff, so he's going, "Oh, they're all making me do it, I don't really want to, but I suppose I'll do it." And then I think he rather enjoys it, because what he says he likes, he said a lot of nice things about this band, doing it, because I think it's no disrespect to the other members of versions of ELO, but the technology, the sound technology wasn't there to you couldn't mic up cellos and violins and make them sound good. He sort of couldn't. So he was always frustrated by the limitations of the gear, of the technology.
Yeah, because he kind of finished. We've talked about that kind of technological revolution in live shows, and he missed that, didn't he? He's kind of come in. He's left at one end and then come back in when it's pretty much as good as it's going to get for the see. Well, line arrays were not that was around when he finished first time, I guess.
No, but I mean, like for example, a big part of his of the records is backing vocals. They're really complicated parts, and Ian, who's one of our singers, along with my wife actually, he got the job of like taking this stuff apart and learning, making parts for people, and it's like 7 parts sometimes. It's really complicated, and we're playing as well and all that. But I think like Jeff had never heard that performed, and he really, like as I say, he was saying, "I'm going to have to teach him everything." And once he sort of realised or recognised that we were really in it with him, and we were determined to not stop until he was happy. Yeah. He kind of, it's not like he leaves us to do it, but but he knows no one's trying to get away with it or trying to blag it. Everyone's really trying to get it right. And I think, he's like I say, he said very nice things about this lineup, and it's never sounded so good. Well, I would counter that with that the technology allows it to sound that good as well, because he's had great musicians always. But it's, and he does it old school, and so the show is really entirely about the music, and they just, you can do whatever flashy bits around him. He's not paying any attention to it. He doesn't care. He just stands and plays the songs, and essentially that's what we do as well. And it's very different to a kind of big pop show, despite it being a lot of the same musicians that I always work with. But
it keeps it interesting.
Yeah, and it's just, and these are songs that in fact the effect is on an audience is the same. Take that, their audience love the songs, they just want to hear him played live, and they're absolutely ecstatic. And it's the same with Jeff. These are people, you can see people like smooching and crying, and it's the same thing. The songs really mean something. I'm going a bit emotional even saying it, because there's a song called Telephone Line that we play, and it's the few times we played it, I was properly welling up, because I love it anyway, but you could just see what it means to people. It's brilliant.
I know the song well. Listen, I'm conscious of time. To kind of bring us into land, tell us, for any aspiring session musician, be that studio live, what advice would you give people now that are looking to kind of craft this as their living?
Well, after all I've said, I mean, you know, the business has changed, and I'm not really sure what it looks like for a kind of 20-year-old now. I know there are more kind of you know, academic kind of ways of, you know, learn guitar, learn bass, drums, what have you. It's probably good to. I don't think I would have flourished in a kind of hothouse environment. I think I would have just gone, shit, everyone's better than me.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop doing this, you know. So I don't think that would have worked for me. But I think that I hope that the basic things I said still hold true. That it just get as good as you can get, but keep an open mind. You know, treat all music with respect, even if it's not your particular bag. You know, just try and find the thing in it that you can latch on to. Be seen playing as much as you can, but I don't know how the, you know, I just don't know. I'm 57 now. I don't know what the, you know, what that landscape looks like anymore. But I know that people are still always impressed by music being performed. Like they just are. You know, if you go to a pub and someone's singing. I remember when Adele did a song on the Brits years ago, just piano, and people were blown away because it was a woman singing a song brilliantly and a man playing a piano brilliantly. But it was like it was a revelation for people. You know, you go, that's what she does. You know, that's what she can do. I've lost your sound actually, mate. I think.
Yeah.
Oh no, I've got you.
Yeah.
It's all right. I've got you. So I think, you know, I think be seen playing as much as you can, and I guess you know, online is a way you can do that. But there's kind of a bit of an overkill of people
There is.
on, you know. So in that sense, I don't know, but you know, I'd just say don't lose heart, because people are always impressed by music being played, by something being done well, you know, and sort of with emotion and stuff. People always get that, and just enjoy. You know, I've seen it change, and I know there's a lot of talk now about, you know, particularly with streaming, and how where's the revenue? How do artists actually make some sort of a living doing what they're doing? And the jury's still out on that, really. You know, I don't know, but I do think that if you love music, you know, if it's what you love to do and you're good at it, or you feel you've got something to offer, just do it. You know, just do it, because what else are you going to do? You know, it's you know, it still gives me a great deal of joy just to play. You know, I sometimes pick up a guitar and with not anything in mind, and then I just realise I've been playing for 20 minutes or half an hour, and I don't know what I'm playing or what, but it's just that feeling of doing something well. And I think you can get the same thing probably from, like, you know, like gaming or something like that, something that you get really immersed in it and you get really good at it. But I don't know what, I'm old, you know, but I don't know what the
It doesn't have value to anybody else, does it? I guess music.
Well, no, I mean, yeah, there's something about playing. You know, I remember playing when I was a kid. You know, we just played the same riff for hours and hours, just for the joy of that interaction. You know, and you can't sort of whack that, really. You can't. There's no way to. There's no other way to do that.
I agree entirely. Listen, Milton, thank you so much for taking the time out to chat, mate. It's really good to see you. So thank you very much for that, and we'll do it again sometime.
Absolutely, man. Thank you very much.
Mate. Thanks ever so much.